never thought my life would take such a turn. Looking back, I guess I should have seen the signs, but when you're in the middle of it, you just trust. My name's Mark, and for most of my life, I believed in duty. Duty to my country, to my family, to the promises I made. I served in the military, stationed not too far from home in Texas. The work was demanding, sure, but every time I came back to our little house, I felt like it was all worth it. My wife, Lisa, and our daughter, Sophie, were my world. Lisa always had this way of making everything seem perfect on the surface, always talking about how lucky we were, how people envied our marriage. I ate it up because I loved her and I wanted to believe it. Sophie, our little 15-year-old, was my anchor. She had her mom's smile and my stubborn streak. Every time I walked through that front door, she'd run to me yelling, "Daddy!" and hug me like I'd been gone for years, even if it had only been a few days. That feeling, that sense of home was what kept me going during the long shifts, the tough assignments, and the moments when I questioned why I signed up in the first place. I thought I had it all: stability, love, a future. But I was wrong. All it took was one phone call to shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. Let me tell you a little bit about myself so you can understand where I'm coming from. I'm a soldier through and through. I've been in the military for over a decade, served in multiple deployments overseas, and seen my fair share of tough situations. I've been in the kind of places where you have to keep your head on a swivel because one wrong move could be your last. But through all of it, I always had one thing that kept me grounded: my family. Lisa and I met right before my first big deployment. She was this outgoing, confident woman who could light up any room she walked into. I fell for her hard and fast. She had this way of making me feel like I was the center of the universe, and when you're about to ship off to a war zone, that kind of thing sticks with you. We got married just a year later, and soon after, Sophie came into our lives. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. Family meant everything to me because I didn't grow up with much of one. My parents split when I was young, and my old man was never really around. I swore I'd never do that to my own kid. So whenever I had to leave, I made sure to call home every chance I got, made sure they knew I was thinking about them. Lisa, though, she always had this air about her, like she thought she was better than everyone else. It didn't bother me at first because I chalked it up to confidence, but over time it started to feel more like arrogance. She'd always talk about how much better we were than other couples, how people envied us, how she could have married someone more successful if she wanted to. I laughed it off, thinking she was just joking, but deep down, I guess it bothered me more than I let on. I ignored the little things: the way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about work, the way she always had to be the center of attention at social events, and the way she'd spend money like it grew on trees. I was too busy trying to keep things together to question it. I figured every marriage has its rough spots, right? But everything changed with one phone call. It was the beginning of the end of the life I thought I had. It was just another day on duty, nothing out of the ordinary. I was in the middle of a routine task when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I'd ignore it until my break, but something told me to check. The number flashing on the screen wasn't one I recognized right away. Local area code, though. My gut clenched. I stepped outside to take the call, and as soon as I answered, I knew something was wrong. The voice on the other end was a woman, her tone shaky but trying to stay composed. "Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Riley from County General. Your daughter, Sophie, she's here. She had a fall at home." I froze. "What? Is she okay? What happened?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "She's stable, but would like you to come in as soon as possible." My stomach twisted into knots. Why wasn't Lisa the one calling me? She was supposed to be home with Sophie. I didn't ask any more questions. I just told them I was on my way and hung up. I bolted out of the building without a second thought, barely remembering to grab my keys. The drive to the hospital was a blur, hands gripping the wheel so tight I thought I might snap it in half. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Kids fall all the time, right? But something felt off. Sophie wasn't a clumsy kid, and Lisa, she should have been the one to call me first. Why hadn't she? When I got to the hospital, I ran through the doors and up to the front desk. "Sophie Thompson, where is she?" A nurse guided me down the hall, and when I finally saw her lying there on that hospital bed, my heart nearly stopped. My baby girl looked so small, so fragile. Her arm was wrapped up in a cast, a bandage covering her forehead, and her eyes were swollen from crying. I rushed to her side, kneeling down next to the bed and taking her little hand in mine. "Hey, sweetheart, Daddy's here." She didn't say anything at first, just blinked up at me, tears welling up in her big brown eyes. I stroked her hair gently, trying to keep my voice steady even though my mind was racing. "What happened, Sophie?" I asked softly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her tiny fingers gripping mine tighter. Mom, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I swallowed hard. What about Mom? Is she okay? Sophie glanced away, biting her lip. I don't want to talk about it. I didn't push. I just held her, reassuring her that everything was going to be okay, even though I had no idea what I was walking into. Lisa still hadn't called me, and that silence was screaming louder than anything else. I sat beside Sophie for what felt like hours, just holding her hand and watching her drift in and out of sleep. My mind was spinning, replaying everything over and over again. Lisa's absence, the nurse's cautious tone, Sophie's hesitation. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. Finally, Sophie stirred, blinking up at me with those tired little eyes. I leaned in, brushing her hair away from her forehead. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what happened?" I asked gently. She hesitated, biting her lips so hard I thought she might hurt herself. I could see the fear in her eyes, and it broke me inside. I saw Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She was with another man." My heart stopped. I felt a sharp, cold stab right in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean, baby? Who was with her?" Sophie looked down, her little hands twisting the hospital blanket nervously. "There were two men, Daddy. I don't know them, but they were in your bedroom, and I saw them through the door. Mom was kissing one of them." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I could see the tears threatening to spill over again. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. "And then what happened, sweetheart?" I got scared. I didn't know what to do, so I ran, but one of them saw me." Her lips quavered, and she clutched my hand tighter. "He chased me down the stairs, Daddy. He pushed me. She broke off into sobs, burying her face in my chest. I felt a white-hot rage build inside me, a kind of anger I hadn't felt even in combat. My little girl, my innocent, sweet Sophie, had seen her mother betray us, and some bastard had put his hands on her. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Did they hurt you anywhere else, baby? Did they touch you?" My voice came out colder than I intended, but I needed to know. She shook her head against my chest. Just when he pushed me. "He laughed when I fell, Daddy. He was laughing." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. Someone had laughed when my daughter tumbled down the stairs. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I promise you, sweetheart, I won't let them hurt you again." Inside, I was boiling. My fists clenched. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to get in my car, drive home, and tear the whole place apart with my bare hands. But I couldn't. Not yet. Sophie needed me to be strong for her. I pressed the call button for the nurse, forcing my voice to stay even. I need to talk to someone about what happened, now. The war wasn't over yet, but I was about to fight a battle I never thought I'd have to. I sat there beside Sophie, my mind racing, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. My baby girl, my innocent little girl, was lying in a hospital bed, bruised and scared because of something she should have never had to see. I held her small hand in mine, trying to keep it together, but inside I was coming apart at the seams. I kept staring at her face, the little bandage on her forehead, the way her tiny fingers trembled in mine. She was trying to be brave, but I could feel her fear, and it crushed me in ways I didn't even know were possible. Lisa. I couldn't stop thinking about her, the woman I trusted, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I left behind to protect and care for our daughter while I served our country, and now she had not only betrayed me. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rage bubbling inside me. I needed to stay calm for Sophie. She needed me to be the strong one right now, but every second that passed I could feel the anger building, boiling, threatening to spill over. Sophie stirred beside me, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, you're mad, aren't you?" I forced a smile, brushing my fingers gently through her hair. "Not at you, sweetheart. Never at you." She looked down, playing with the edge of the hospital blanket. "I didn't mean to see, Daddy. I heard noises and wanted to check." Her voice cracked and she sniffled. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "It's okay, baby. You did nothing wrong." But inside I was screaming. I needed answers. I needed to know who those men were. I needed to know how long this had been going on right under my nose. And most of all, I needed to know what the hell Lisa was thinking, bringing them into our home with our daughter there. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. A doctor stepped inside, clipboard in hand, looking at me with that practiced, neutral expression they all have. "Mr. Thompson, can we talk outside for a moment?" I glanced down at Sophie, kissing her forehead. "I'll be right outside, sweetheart." She nodded sleepily, and I followed the doctor into the hall. "She's going to be okay," the doctor said, his voice calm and professional. "There's no sign of any serious internal injuries, just a mild concussion and a fractured wrist." I exhaled in relief, but stayed silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "There was something else," he continued, lowering his voice. "Your daughter was very scared when she arrived here. She told the nurses that someone hurt her. The police have been informed, Mr. Thompson." My stomach clenched. "The police?" He nodded. "It's protocol in situations like this, especially when a child says they were pushed." I felt my jaw tighten. Good. I wanted them involved. Hell, I wanted to be the one who dragged those bastards in myself. "Thank you, doctor," I said, shaking his hand, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. As he walked away, I leaned against the cold hospital wall, running a hand down my face. This was it. This was the moment I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Lisa had destroyed everything. And I was going to make damn sure she paid for it. The drive home felt longer than it ever had before. The hum of the tires on the asphalt barely registered in my ears over the thoughts racing through my mind. I gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles had turned white. My jaw clenched so hard it felt like my teeth might crack. I kept replaying Sophie's words over and over again in my head. Mom, with another man. And there was another man, too. I wanted to believe there was some kind of mistake, some misunderstanding, but deep down I knew better. I stared out at the road ahead, but my mind was already at home, picturing it all. Lisa in our bedroom, strangers in our house, and Sophie standing in the hallway, scared and confused. The thought of my little girl being caught up in whatever mess Lisa had created made my stomach churn with rage. I stood up and made every red light, every slow driver in front of me felt like an obstacle standing between me and the truth. My mind bounced back and forth between anger and heartbreak. I had been busting my ass in the military, sacrificing time with my family to give them a better life. And this is what I come back to? I turned down our street and the familiar sight of our house came into view. For a moment, everything looked the same. The porch light was on, the lawn neatly trimmed, Lisa's car parked in the driveway, but I knew everything was different now. I pulled up and sat there for a minute, engine running, staring at the house like it was a stranger. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The weight of it all pressed down on me, the betrayal, the lies, the fact that I had to face Lisa and look her in the eye after what Sophie had told me. My fingers tapped restlessly against the steering wheel. I wasn't sure what I was going to do once I walked through that door, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to end with a calm conversation. I scanned the windows, looking for any sign of movement inside. The curtains were drawn, and the house seemed eerily still, but my gut told me they were in there. And not just Lisa. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly through my nose, trying to keep my emotions in check, but the anger was there, simmering just beneath the surface, ready to explode. I pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight it felt like I could snap it in half. The house sat there in the dark, looking the same as it always had, but now it felt different. Tainted. The place where I once found comfort and love now felt like a crime scene. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see Lisa's car parked where it always was, sitting there like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't shattered our family, like she hadn't let strangers into our home. My eyes scanned the house, and then I saw it. Through the front window, the faint glow of the kitchen lights, shadows moving inside. I could hear the faint sound of laughter through the slightly open window, and my stomach twisted in rage. I took a deep breath, my fingers flexing against the steering wheel. Stay calm, Mark. Get inside, get the truth. But the calm wasn't coming. Slowly, I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching against the gravel driveway. Each step toward the front door felt like I was walking through a nightmare, a slow-motion crawl toward the moment everything would explode. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The laughter stopped. Lisa was sitting at the kitchen table, looking up at me with wide eyes, frozen mid-sip of her coffee. But what caught my attention wasn't her. It was the two men standing near the counter. One of them had the nerve to look surprised, the other just smirked like he was in control. Lisa's voice wavered. "Mark, what are you doing home?" I ignored her, my eyes locked onto the two men, one tall and lean with a cocky grin that made my fists itch, the other, shorter but stockier, shifting uncomfortably under my stare. "Who the hell are they?" I asked, my voice low, steady but thick with barely contained rage. Lisa jumped to her feet, her hands up like she thought she could smooth this over. Mark, listen, I can explain. Explain? I cut her off, my eyes never leaving the two men. You think you can explain this? The taller guy chuckled, shaking his head. Look, man, no need to get all worked up. We were just... I took a step forward and he stopped talking real quick. You're not going anywhere, I said, my voice cold as ice. The shorter one glanced toward the door, his eyes darting nervously. I took another step forward, blocking his path. Sit down. My voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the threat behind it. Lisa started crying then, but I wasn't looking at her. My eyes were locked on the two intruders in my house. They weren't walking out of here without consequences. Not tonight. The room was dead silent, except for Lisa's shaky breathing and the distant hum of the fridge. The two men just stood there, frozen, unsure whether to act tough or start begging. I took another step forward, my fist clenching at my sides. You think you can walk into my house, into my bedroom? My voice was low, controlled, but I could feel the rage boiling just beneath the surface. The taller one with a cocky grin straightened up, trying to puff out his chest. Hey man, look, I think we should just... I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw before he even had a chance to react. The impact sent him stumbling backward, crashing into the kitchen counter. A sick satisfaction coursed through me as he groaned, clutching his face. The shorter one, the nervous one, took a step back, hands up. Whoa, hey. I was on him before he could finish his sentence. A solid punch to the gut knocked the wind out of him, and he doubled over, gasping for air. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall, my face inches from his. You pushed my daughter down the stairs, didn't you? He shook his head frantically, fear in his eyes. No, man, I swear. I slammed him into the wall harder. Don't lie to me. Lisa was screaming behind me now, pleading for me to stop, but I wasn't hearing her. My focus was on the bastards who thought they could laugh, while my daughter cried at the bottom of a staircase. The tall one groaned from the floor, trying to get up, but I was on him again. I grabbed him by the shirt, hauling him up, and landed another punch square in his gut. He coughed, wheezing, and I let him drop like the trash he was. Lisa ran to me, grabbing my arm. Mark, please, stop! I shook her off, breathing heavily, staring down at the two pathetic excuses for men crumpled in my kitchen. You don't get to tell me to stop, Lisa, I spat, my voice shaking with fury. You brought them here. You let this happen. The shorter guy was still pinned against the wall, tears in his eyes now. Please, man, we didn't mean for my daughter to get hurt. You didn't mean to laugh when she fell. I growled, shoving him one last time before letting go. He crumpled to the floor next to his buddy. I pulled out my phone, dialing without hesitation. You're both going to sit your asses right there until the cops get here. Lisa's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Mark, don't do this. I shot her a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. You did this, Lisa. You did this to us. She covered her face, sobbing, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. All I could think about was Sophie lying in that hospital bed, scared, hurt, betrayed. As the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, I stood there, fists still shaking, watching the two men, who had no idea who they were messing with. The two of them were still on the floor, groaning and breathing heavily, but they weren't going anywhere. I made sure of that. The taller one was holding his jaw, probably wondering if it was broken, while the other just stared at me, wide-eyed like a trapped animal. Lisa stood there sobbing, her hands shaking as she covered her face. Mark, please, we can talk about this, she whimpered, like she thought she could somehow smooth this over, and like she hadn't just destroyed our family. I ignored her. My hand was steady as I punched in the number, each beep of the dial tone feeling like another nail in the coffin of what was once my marriage. I held the phone to my ear, my eyes never leaving the two pieces of trash sitting in my kitchen. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice rang out. I need officers at my home, I said, my voice tight but controlled. I rattled off the address. There's been a break-in. 2 men trespassing in my house. My daughter was hurt because of them. Lisa gasped behind me. No, Mark, don't do this, please. I shot her a look, my voice low and cold. You don't get to ask me for anything. The dispatcher continued. Are the suspects still in your home, sir? I glanced at the two of them. The shorter one tried to move, but I stepped forward, and he immediately froze, his hands up in surrender. Yeah, I said into the phone. They're still here. I made sure of it. There was a pause on the other end. Are you safe, sir? I clenched my jaw. I'm fine. Just send someone before I do something I might regret. Officers are on the way, she said, her voice still annoyingly calm. Stay on the line. I hung up without another word and stuffed the phone back into my pocket. I stood there, staring down at them, my chest heaving with every breath. They both avoided eye contact now, looking anywhere but at me. Lisa took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was a mistake. I scoffed, shaking my head. A mistake? I spat the word out like poison. You think this is just a mistake, Lisa? Our daughter is lying in a hospital bed because of you. Tears streamed down her face, but I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, getting closer. The realization hit Lisa then, and she panicked, rushing toward me and grabbing my arm. Please, Mark, don't let them take me away. I'll explain everything, I swear. I pulled my arm free and glared at her. You don't get to explain. You're done talking. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, and within seconds, there was a loud knock at the door. Police, open up! I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, letting them in. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their eyes immediately scanning the scene, me standing in the middle of the room, fists clenched, Lisa in tears, and the 2 idiots on the floor looking like they'd seen a ghost. One of the officers, a stocky guy with sharp eyes, spoke first. Sir, what's going on here? I stepped aside and pointed. Those 2 were in my house without permission. My daughter is in the hospital right now because of them. The officer looked at me, then down at the 2 men. All right, both of you, hands behind your backs. The taller one groaned. Come on, man, we didn't do anything. I took a step forward, and the officer put a hand on my chest, stopping me. Sir, let us handle this. I nodded, stepping back, breathing heavily as I watched them cuff the 2 men and haul them up to their feet. Lisa was crying harder now, her hands clasped together. Please, Mark, please don't let them arrest me. I looked at her, my voice flat and emotionless. You're not my problem anymore. The officers took their statements, and I made sure they knew everything, how Sophie had seen them, how she had gotten hurt, how Lisa had betrayed our family. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, my answer was simple: every single charge you can throw at them. As they led the men outside to the waiting patrol cars, I stood in the doorway, watching. The taller one turned to look at me, and I could see it in his eyes. He thought he got off easy. He didn't. Lisa sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. But I felt nothing. The love I once had for her was gone, replaced with something colder. I took one last look around the house, our house, and then I walked out, slamming the door behind me. I stood outside the house for a long moment, watching the red and blue lights reflect off the windows. The officers were still inside, finishing up with Lisa, but I couldn't bring myself to go back in. Everything felt empty. I should have been feeling something: anger, sadness, maybe even relief, but all I felt was numb. A few minutes later, the front door creaked open and Lisa stepped out onto the porch, her face streaked with tears. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, her hands trembling as she clutched her sweater around herself. Mark, please, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I crossed my arms and stared at her, silent. She took a shaky step toward me, her eyes desperate. Just listen to me. No. My voice came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care. You don't get to talk your way out of this, Lisa. Not after what you did. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I wasn't buying it. I'd seen her cry before, and maybe back then it would have meant something to me, but not anymore. I never meant for it to happen this way, she choked out. I was lonely, Mark. You were always gone, and I held up a hand, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to make this about me. My jaw clenched, and I could feel the rage bubbling up again, but I forced it down. I was gone because I was providing for us, for you, for Sophie. And you threw it all away. She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. You brought them into our home. You let them near our daughter. My voice cracked on the last word, and I swallowed hard, shaking my head. And now she's in a hospital bed because of you. Lisa broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, but I just stood there, unmoved. You know, I continued, my voice quieter now, I would have forgiven a lot, Lisa, maybe not easily, but I would have tried. But after what happened to Sophie, there's nothing left to save here. She sniffled, looking up at me with pleading eyes. Mark, I love you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. No, you don't. You love yourself. You love the attention. You love the lies. I took a deep breath, looking at her one last time. But you sure as hell don't love me, and you definitely don't love our daughter the way a mother should. Her face twisted in pain, but I didn't care anymore. I'm done, I said firmly. I'll come by tomorrow to get my things. I want you gone before I get back. She gasped, shaking her head. Mark, where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Not my problem. Before she could say another word, I turned and walked away. A few days after filing for divorce, I got a call from the local police department. I was sitting in Sophie's hospital room, reading to her from her favorite storybook when my phone buzzed. I saw the number and felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Mr. Thompson, the voice on the other end was serious. We have some updates regarding the individuals found in your home. I stood up, stepping outside the hospital room so Sophie wouldn't hear. Go on, the officer sighed. One of the men, the taller one, his name is Brian Cummings. He's wanted in 3 states for fraud, assault, and other charges I can't even list over the phone. I felt my blood run cold. And he was in my house, I muttered, pinching the bridge of my nose. That's right. And we're also investigating Lisa's connection to him. From what we can tell, she's been in contact with him for quite some time. She may have known about his criminal activity and failed to report it. I clenched my jaw, the realization hitting me like a freight train. So what are you saying? She's in trouble? The officer hesitated. At the moment, she's looking at potential charges for conspiracy and obstruction. We'll need to bring her in for questioning. I leaned against the wall, staring at the ground, trying to process it all. Lisa, my wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, wasn't just cheating on me, she was tangled up with criminals. And worse, she had put Sophie in direct danger because of it. Do what you have to do, I finally said, my voice tight with anger. I'll cooperate in any way I can. Understood, we'll keep you informed. The call ended and I just stood there for a moment trying to piece together how I'd let things get this far without seeing the signs. Lisa always had this inflated sense of herself, acting like she deserved more, like our life together was never quite enough for her. I guess, in the end, that wasn't just talk. She went looking for more excitement, more danger, and she found it in the worst possible way. I walked back into Sophie's room and sat down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked up at me with those trusting eyes. Daddy, is Mommy coming to see me? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. All right now, sweetheart, but I'm here, okay? I'm not going anywhere. She nodded and squeezed my hand. I love you, Daddy. My throat tightened and I kissed her forehead. I love you too, baby girl. At that moment, I realized that Lisa's mess was her own. I couldn't fix it, and I wasn't going to try. My only focus now was Sophie, keeping her safe, keeping her happy, and making sure she never had to go through something like this again. Lisa's world was crumbling, and she was going to have to face the consequences. But me, I was moving forward. A few weeks passed, and with each day I felt the weight of it all slowly lifting, like I was finally breathing fresh air after being stuck in a toxic fog for too long. Sophie was healing, both physically and emotionally, and I was doing everything in my power to make her feel safe again. Lisa, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The police had enough evidence to charge her with obstruction and aiding a known criminal, and last I heard, she was facing serious legal trouble. I didn't go to her hearings. I didn't even answer the few desperate calls she made before I blocked her number. She wasn't my problem anymore. Instead, I focused on what mattered. I moved Sophie and me to a new house, across town, away from the memories that haunted every corner of our old one. It wasn't much, smaller, cozier, but it was ours. And most importantly, it was safe. One evening, I sat on the couch watching Sophie color in her new bedroom, humming to herself like nothing bad had ever happened. It was the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I didn't need Lisa. I didn't need the life I thought I had with her. What I needed was right here, my daughter, our little home, and the quiet strength I found in moving forward. I learned a lot through all of this. I learned that trust, once broken, can never truly be put back together the same way. I learned that some people aren't who they pretend to be, no matter how much you want to believe otherwise. And I learned that, in the end, the only thing you can really count on is yourself and the people who truly love you. Sophie looked up at me from her coloring book and smiled. Daddy, are you happy? I paused for a second, then nodded. Yeah, sweetheart, I think I am. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a lie. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.